My name is Henry. I'm one of the co-founders of Snorkel AI. Really excited to be chatting with you all today. Going to be focusing on taking a look at how we accelerate AI and NLP development in healthcare use cases specifically. I'll note that while healthcare use cases are really core to the heart of our mission at Snorkel, I myself am not a healthcare pharma medical practitioner myself, come much more from the AI and NLP side. And really what we're looking to do is provide tools to those experts, people who really know what they're doing, to get their jobs done faster at lower cost and lead to better outcomes overall. So I'll preface with that. Feel free to ask some hard questions at the end though, and I'll do my absolute best. As I mentioned, healthcare use cases have always been really close to the heart of our mission at Snorkel. I've been working on Snorkel since back when we started it as a research project, and some of our first real world use cases were with researchers and clinicians at Stanford Hospital. That's kind of really where we start to see the technology take shape and where we kind of start to realize the magnitude of impact that we could have with what we were building. So again, just been always very close to the heart of our mission. It's been awesome to see that continue through the company now as well, where we're working with really fantastic leading organizations across healthcare, pharma, biotech, and more. And we'll touch on some of those use cases towards the end. Always excited to get to that point. Before I forget, before my team comes up and starts holding up signs, we do have a booth out there. So do encourage folks to go take a look. You can check out a demo and learn more about what we're doing. Okay, let's get started with the actual stuff then. And I'll actually start with some research from some of our friends from Stanford Hospital. I was standing at the back and realized it might be a little bit hard to read, so I'll just read the headline out loud, which is Geographic Distribution of US Cohorts Used to Train Deep Learning Algorithms. Whenever I read those types of things, I immediately think, okay, what's the BuzzFeed headline that's going to get generated based on actual good research like this? And in fact, there were a number of them. But I can skip through to the punchline, right? Which was that they found that the vast majority of data used to train AI systems for healthcare use cases in the United States came from only 3 states: California, New York, and Massachusetts. And I think most speakers in my shoes would use this as an opportunity to poke fun at that specific group of 3 states. I, however, have been a permanent resident of all 3 over the course of my life, so would be maybe a little bit too self-deprecating up here. But jokes, non-jokes aside, that finding should be pretty deeply disturbing to just about everyone in this room, right? Having that bias of a sample that people are using to train systems that are making decisions or helping to support operations in healthcare can lead to some very measurable negative outcomes, right? And these are more headlines that I'm sure people have heard. Things like tools misdiagnosing patients based on skin tone, things like predictive analytics systems for billing, having borderline discriminatory behavior against people who are from areas that the system wasn't trained on initially, right? So the big question here should be why? Why is the majority of data that people are using to build AI systems for healthcare use cases in the US coming from only 3 states, right? Data sharing and sensitivity should be top of mind for everyone, and it's very true that we just don't have large-scale useful processes for sharing data, both processes and secure infrastructure for sharing data in the US. Absolutely true. But we've seen a rise in the amount of data, patient data that we've been able to share across institutions, state boundaries, et cetera, et cetera. Taking a step back, the kind of bigger picture here is that it just takes massive effort to operationalize data for AI use cases, right? There just wasn't enough data that was AI ready outside of those 3 states. And so, what does it mean for data to be AI ready? 2 kind of big ingredients that we like to look at. The first is that it's in a processed form that an AI algorithm can understand, right? You've taken kind of the raw information and turned it into a form that you can actually plug into a mathematical model, right? The second bit, and really, really critically, The data has to be annotated by experts with the correct answer, specifically for supervised machine learning, but that's the vast majority of the kind of AI systems that we see being built out there, right? And you have to build a very large data set of that expert labeled data, right? So think thousands or millions of records, again, all annotated with the correct answer that you want your machine learning model to learn to replicate, right? So this, as I'm sure people can understand, has massive expense associated with it, both in terms of time and opportunity cost of experts doing that type of preparation and annotation work, right? We'll talk more on that in a bit. But thankfully, very, very thankfully, this is a complete and total anomaly, right? There's never been any other system built in industry that has had adverse effects because it was built using the wrong data, right? This is the only instance we know of this happening. Oh man, ruined my joke. Okay, all right, here are a bunch of headlines from just about like every other industry where it's the same story over and over again, right? You see it in retail, you see it in tech, you see it certainly in systems making decisions related to policing, hiring, and many other things, right? And I'm sure that we've all seen many of these headlines before in the past. Right? The truth is that just about every industry has a massive need for more reliable, more scalable systems and workflows for operationalizing data for AI usage, for making data AI ready, right? Again, you see it in the headlines. We see it every day in the organizations that we talk to across finance, insurance, telco, retail, tech, and of course, healthcare as well. Everyone faces very unique challenges as well, and healthcare is absolutely no exception to that. Just touching on a few of them, right? Again, those challenges that make it particularly difficult to get data ready for AI usage in healthcare, right? So one, a lot of the data is semi-structured or unstructured, right? Think raw text data like patient notes, think PDF documents that might have tables and charts in them, of course, images, and a whole kind of assortment of other things, right? There's a lot of that data available, but it takes a significant amount of effort and is usually a very ad hoc effort to get that ready in, again, a structured format that you can plug into an algorithm that can actually learn from it. The second we already touched on is sensitivity, right? Medical data is extremely sensitive. There are both institutional and legal restrictions on where I can store and process that data. Makes it very, very hard to share and kind of aggregate in a meaningful way. Subject matter expertise. It's actually a little bit of a redundant one. SME stands for subject matter expert, but I'm not going to be too harsh on myself here. So subject matter expertise, right? Especially in healthcare, right? Data can't just be labeled by anyone, right? It's often clinicians, researchers, people whose time is extremely expensive, or there's a very high opportunity cost to have their time going and reviewing raw records, labeling thousands or potentially millions of them just to get it ready for AI usage. And then all of these kind of come together to create a situation very similar to what I touched on at the beginning here, right? Where the data that you're using to build your AI systems is not representative of the population as a whole, right? I just can't get my hands on enough data from outside of my institution. I can't get enough experts to look at it for long enough. I can't take, a bunch of very valuable but hard to structure data and plug that into my AI system just because I don't have repeatable workflows for getting it ready, right? And again, you end up in a situation where you're potentially using a very biased subsample of your data that just isn't representative of the population that you're looking at as a whole. Okay. Zooming out here, there are trends, again, that we see across every single industry that we work with. And again, we end up working with people across many, many verticals. And while there are very unique challenges to healthcare, there are challenges that just about every single other industry face, right? The vast majority of data that enterprises and organizations want to use to build AI use cases is unstructured, as I already touched on. It's unlabeled in its kind of raw form. And again, just is not coming out of the system ready for AI usage. We like to think of this as the kind of iceberg under the surface, right? Again, massive opportunity if we can operationalize the vast stores of PDF documents, of raw text data, conversational data, notes and charts, images, all this stuff that we want to use for AI use cases. But the tools, the workflows just aren't there for most organizations today. Ends up, as a result, we're seeing data science teams relying on very ad hoc and manual methods for getting data ready for AI usage, right? So each individual use case might have its own approach to get data ready, and we just kind of don't see people being able to aggregate value and investments that they've made previously. The biggest bottleneck in almost every single use case comes down to manually labeling data, which is, I'm sure, something that everyone here is familiar with, right? It comes by many names, right? We often see people asking their own data science teams or subject matter experts to annotate data themselves, right? Again, in healthcare settings, this is often clinicians and researchers, right? And asking them to hand label thousands, millions of individual data points, again, has massive opportunity costs. They could be spending their time actually treating patients, right? And because of the limited availability of subject matter experts means you might be waiting weeks or months of time before a data science team has a data set that's ready to actually go start training models, doing analysis, all that kind of good stuff, right? Crowd working services is kind of another option here for some industries, but it often ends up being a total non-starter in healthcare, right? Again, either due to data sensitivity, I just cannot send it externally to someone, someone else can actually label it, or due to domain expertise challenges, right? The folks that are doing the data labeling on these crowd working services just don't know enough about the field in order to label the data with high quality. Now, even if I do manage to scrap together a data set that my data science team can use, the job is often not done, right? In just about every single real world use case that we see data distribution shifting over time. We see changes in objectives that I have for the system that I'm building, right? The administration team comes and tells me that, oh, hey, I know you labeled your data set to build a 4-class document classifier, but actually the thing that we need for operations is an 8-class classifier, and I have to go all the way back to the beginning, get my data labeled all over again, incur that same cost in terms of, again, opportunity cost of expert time, and have my data science team waiting before they can do development again for those, again, potentially weeks or months of time that it might take to relabel that data set manually, right? So again, all of these kind of situations necessitate the situation where you have this extremely expensive manual relabeling, and I keep incurring this cost over and over again, right? Again, all while development might be fully blocked. Okay, so hopefully I've convinced you that this kind of classical, old-fashioned, tried and true, but very inefficient method for manually labeling data is not the way to kind of scale AI usage to repeatably and scalably get data ready for AI use cases, right? For many of you, no convincing was needed. I'm sure many folks in this room have faced these exact same challenges. And every data science team that we see in healthcare and in the other industries that we work with face these exact same challenges, right? So, what if there was a different approach here, right? I always feel like I'm on Shark Tank or something like that. It has to be a better way, right? Healthcare things don't end up doing too well on Shark Tank for very good reasons. But anyway, I digress, right? So when we think about kind of a new approach here, right, and I've kind of spoiled the punchline, the idea is programmatic labeling, and we'll get into this in a bit. We really want to make sure that we're able to take advantage of that same really critical domain expertise to actually label this data with high quality, but that we can do so more scalably, right? So we don't incur those huge opportunity costs where we could do it much more quickly so that data science teams can find themselves unblocked, delivering kind of repeatable value in a much faster way, right? So let's talk about programmatic labeling, and often the fastest way to start is just with an example, right? The key idea here is that rather than me going through thousands, millions of records, manually annotating each one, I instead try to describe to the system exactly what it is I'm looking for in order to annotate my data, right? So one very simple one might be that, again, not a clinician here, but a very simple, this is actually one pulled from a real use case where a clinician did write it, that if I see a pattern that looks like benign growth or tumor in patient notes, label it as low priority. If, for example, I'm building a classifier that can read a medical record and triage it to being high, medium, or low priority, right? A very simple intuition, but hey, look, now if I encode this directly, I don't have to go look for this pattern again through thousands or millions of individual records and annotate those manually, right? Instead, this annotation can be done at machine speed in seconds, minutes, or hours, rather than the weeks or months of time it might take me to manually review, again, thousands or millions of individual records here, right? And that's really the key idea overall, right? We ask subject matter experts when we ask subject matter experts to label data manually, they review the record, they decide what the label should be based on some reasoning that's in their head, and then they discard that reasoning entirely and just record the label itself, right? But this idea with programmatic labeling is that you're still doing review on a subset of documents. I don't have to go through thousands or millions of them. Come up with that same reasoning, but instead encode that, potentially noisily, we'll get that into a second, in maybe a single or set of what we call labeling functions, this one being an example right here, right? Again, something like if I see benign growth or tumor in patient notes, label it as low priority. I encode that programmatically as a labeling function, and then my system can go ahead and, again, annotate at machine speed, seconds, minutes, hours, rather than human speed, potentially taking weeks or months of time to get through thousands or millions of records. There are a bunch of other benefits as well, right? Rather than having to go back and look at my data set and try to reason about what the person who labeled it was thinking at the time, right? This is just being labeled by code. So I can go inspect the specific logic, I can audit where each individual label came from, and I can reuse them across use cases, right? I can take that labeling function and potentially apply it or just kind of transform it to use it for a similar type of use case, right? Programmatic labeling, this broad idea, is a very general paradigm. We saw one specific example where I'm looking for kind of a text pattern potentially here. There are many other things that we can dump into this exact same framework and approach, right? If I have some old existing manual labels sitting around, go for it. Dump those in and Snorkel Flow will, kind of getting to the punchline again, right? Whatever the system is going to take a look at those and kind of combine them with the programmatic signals that I'm providing. I can take subject matter expert knowledge and code it programmatically. I can do lookups against knowledge bases or ontologies. I can look at an old rule-based system that I had making decisions before and just kind of dump that same logic into this system. And then increasingly being able to take some of the latest and greatest stuff as far as large language model goes, as far as kind of data mining and looking, pattern recognition goes, and have those be suggested directly to a user so they can review them and say, hey, is this a pattern that I would like to use to programmatically label my data set, right? Okay, of course, as I dump in these types of signals, it's impossible to encode human knowledge in a perfect type of way here. Or maybe my knowledge is a little bit noisy itself, that something like this is not always going to get the correct answer. I might say there's both a benign growth and a malicious tumor in the patient notes, right? And so the key is, how do we denoise and combine these potentially noisy and conflicting signals into one set of ground truth labels that I can use to train my machine learning model? And luckily, this is something that we've largely taken care of for you already. We've done years of research. Go ahead and read those extremely boring papers if you want to. There's some decent summaries and blog posts on our website. But how to denoise and combine these, again, into one set of training data labels that I can use for any type of downstream use case here. This kind of broader idea of, hey, accelerating AI and NLP development through programmatic labeling, right, has led to a much more iterative approach to ML development overall, right, where I'm not blocked on waiting for experts to manually label data. I can much more iteratively update and engineer my training data directly like I would kind of code or a specific machine learning model. Again, has led to this much more iterative development approach for AI and NLP models overall, right? Where I can incrementally decide, should I invest in my training data? Should I invest in tuning my model? All driven by kind of analyses that are provided really directly for your specific use case. This is, again, this data-centric approach to AI usage is something that, or to AI development is something that we've been working on for years, first at Stanford, now through the company, published, I think, over 65 papers now on Snorkel Tech at this point. Really encourage you to check out some of the other use cases that we have up on our website. And again, all of this is coming to life in our development platform, Snorkel Flow. Again, encourage you to take a look at the demo that we have out there. But again, giving you interfaces to really directly engineer your training data for specific use cases through programmatic labeling. You can do that kind of directly in tune with model training as well, and all kind of guided by analyses. And just taking a quick look at the development interface that we've built here, can see, again, all of this coming together in one place, where we give you interfaces, again, to define logic for labeling data programmatically, really quickly updating your training data sets in response to kind of new signals that you're providing, retraining models directly, or taking that training data that you've built and bringing it to some kind of external platform if you kind of prefer that type of approach and have made those level of investments already. And then again, have these kind of real-time analyses. So I know, should I be focusing on my training data? Should I be focusing on my model or something else, right? This kind of really breaks the mold of what we call model-centric AI development, where I'm really focusing on tweaking and tuning my model, holding my training data set fixed, and instead, again, providing these workflows and interfaces for people to engineer their training data sets directly and turn this into a much more iterative and holistic development approach overall. This also leads to a number of really fantastic benefits outside of just kind of development speed and time to production, especially in really high expertise settings like healthcare, right? One big one is that it provides this collaborative surface for domain experts and data scientists to collaborate really directly, right? Every team that we talk to talks about the pain of having to email an Excel spreadsheet back and forth, asking their domain experts to label thousands more records because their model wasn't doing what they wanted to, or maybe the last attempt at labeling just wasn't quite exactly right. Domain experts are frustrated because their time is not being used very well. Data scientists are frustrated because they can't get their data in more quickly. But having a collaborative surface like Snorkel Flow, where again, and you can see kind of pieces of this here, domain experts can provide annotations, comments, tags, all these different types of things, and intuition kind of in simplified interfaces for how to programmatically label data. Data scientists can review that really directly and again, incorporate those as they wish into their development process as they're building training data and models as well. I'll touch on a few specific use cases, but just flashing up a few of these really awesome results that we've seen here across, again, a number of different industries. And again, just want to highlight that we've built Snorkel Flow in a way that can tackle a whole bunch of different kind of technical use cases across different industries by focusing on, again, these really high value data inputs that we see people trying to use time and time again, and different kind of specific ML objectives that they have, such as classifying documents, extracting information from documents, analyzing conversations, including structured data, and a whole number of others as well. Some of the ones to highlight across healthcare and pharma are clinical trial analytics, computer-aided diagnosis, and claims processing as well. And so why don't we kind of round out here just by taking a quick look at a couple of use cases. So the first is with Memorial Sloan Kettering. They're really fantastic customers and users of Snorkel Flow with us. Again, can see more info on all of these on our website and do encourage you to take a look. Again, the kind of challenge that they were facing from the get-go was identifying candidates for clinical trials from patient notes. By identifying relevant proteins. And here we see a few examples, things that they're looking for in pathology reports. HER2 was the specific one that this kind of ontology was looking for. So again, the challenge, the situation they found themselves in was that reviewing patient records for mentions of presence of a protein manually takes a lot of time, and again has to be done by clinical scientists, right? And so if they're doing that each and every time they're trying to identify a patient, just again, not a scalable system, incredibly high opportunity cost. The training data labels that they had also had disagreement from experts. They were labeling them differently. And the models that they were building based on these had poor quality, largely as a result of not having enough data and of the data that they were getting just not having high enough quality, not being kind of inspectable and easy to correct if they saw issues with labeling directly. Just a quick quote from Subrata, who's principal data scientist at Memorial Sloan Kettering, just kind of talking about this use case and the value that they recognize. The biggest challenge that we have, which is true of any AI ML project, but especially so in clinical context, is how we label training data, right? Our labelers, our physicians, our researchers, their time is extremely expensive. So what they were able to do in this use case was build a multi-class document classifier, again, extracting information from each of those individual records to automatically identify whether those proteins, there are mentions of those proteins being present, right? They were able to combine some pre-existing labels that they had, in addition to labeling thousands more medical records programmatically in Snorkel Flow. And they were able to build models with over 93% accuracy, which met their kind of benchmark for production deployment. Again, just in a few weeks, we're able to label thousands of medical records that it was taking them months and months of time to do so before, and actually get to a production model that was ready to go. One last one I'll touch on, extracting information from clinical trial designs for patient notes to design inclusion-exclusion criteria. So again, this is a similar situation where it was being done manually by clinical scientists, both to actually for real operations, but then also to build training data to potentially automate this in the future. But it was an incredible expense, right? Over 140 SMEs per month were spending time labeling training data or kind of doing this manually to actually support the process before they had an automated solution in place. And what they were able to do instead with Snorkel Flow was build an AI system that consisted of a kind of multi-step pipeline, something that you can do in the product directly. First, kind of an NER model to extract mentions of diseases, then a model to link those to specific inclusion-exclusion criteria that they had in a knowledge base, and then kind of dump those out so that they could use them for analytics. They were able to label over 340,000 documents, then able to train a model that had over 99% accuracy. And when they faced one of those situations, I'll go like all the way back where they had some shift in objectives, like this one that I'd illustrated here, they were able to, again, relabel their data just by changing code a little bit, hitting relabel, and they were off to the races again. All in all, they estimated that this was a savings of around $10 million in SME time to build a system of this quality, right? Again, having spent tons and tons of time having experts label data manually instead to produce those results previously. Okay, that's all I got. I think we are at or over time here. Again, please do stop by our booth. You can email us at info@snorkel.ai. And thank you all again. We'll be around to chat with folks later.